The other day, I was listening to one of my favorite weekly YouTube streams. The guests were discussing Superman. Some of them hated him, some were bored by him, some loved him. Now, I fall into the latter category. A number of criticisms were launched at Krypton's last son, that he's dull, he's overpowered, he's not relevant in today's world. And as I listened and thought about what was being said, some responses began to form in my tiny little brain. Now, plenty of YouTube videos and articles have been written about the appeal of Superman, why he's one of the most recognizable superheroes and a cultural icon who's existed for decades. But I'm not going to use any material to refer to those, because what follows is my personal thoughts on the subject. Now, I don't have the critical drinker's talent for perfectly articulating the merits and flaws in a story, or in this case, a character. But I'm going to try and respond to these criticisms of Superman, explain some of the reasons for his enduring and widespread appeal, and finish by suggesting that writing compelling Superman stories is not that difficult. Still, Superman's not to everyone's taste. There are people for which the merits I'm going to expound on will not appeal. Some folks just don't like Superman because they don't like Superman. As one up-and-coming YouTuber said recently, Superman sucks ass. Fair play to you, although this is hardly a thoughtful breakdown of the character. However, the criticisms I heard in this stream indicate a lack of knowledge about the character, both in terms of the practical terms of his abilities and his essential nature. And I've heard folks have used the argument that a character or a story or a series who's been around a long time has been judged by history. And so they possess an innate degree of greatness, while lesser characters or lesser series or lesser stories have faded into obscurity. Now, in that respect, Superman has been around since 1938 and has become a recognizable cultural icon around the world. There's some merit to that argument, but it's a very positivist argument and doesn't really delve into the actual reasons why Superman has gained such a presence in Western culture to begin with. So I'm not giving that argument a lot of credence. So the main criticism is that Superman is dull because he's overpowered. He can solve any problem and is essentially invincible. Clark Kent might be interesting, but according to some of the criticism, once Superman appears, the story is essentially over. Now, there are several responses to this criticism, but they are intertwined with a particular theme that isn't so much that the character himself is lacking, but the writers just don't know what to do with him. Now, I would argue that it isn't actually that difficult to write a compelling Superman story, provided little thought and care is taken to include some key elements. But first, I'd like to spend some time on why he's an appealing character in the first place. And I think we need to start with the appeal of hope, essential decency, and humanity. Now, the most compelling aspect of Superman's character is he is the embodiment of hope, which sounds great, but what does it mean? I mean, sure, he's optimistic and he tries he's the best in others, but that's very simplistic. So what I submit is that the underlying idea of hopefulness that Superman captures is the essential hope for a benevolent higher power. He embodies the idea that right makes might. And we're used to seeing the other way around in the real world. What makes Superman super isn't that he has these great powers. It's that he has these great powers and always uses them selflessly to help others, which is something that humans probably wouldn't do. And what backs up this assertion is the many stories in which Superman has had to contend with challenges without his powers, or against beings who have power greater than his own, or against whom his powers are essentially useless. And regardless of the type of challenge, Superman maintains his noble character. He fights to protect the weak, to promote natural justice. It is his essentially decent nature that people are drawn to. And when he's written well, Superman doesn't just reflect the best elements of humanity. He brings out those elements in other characters. So comments have also been made that Superman is anachronistic, and he struggles to find relevance in today's sort of nihilistic, cynical, postmodern world. Oh, Boy Scout characters like Superman have got no place. Today's heroes must be edgy and dark and complicated. Well, Superman's not edgy and he's not dark, but he is complicated, and I'll address that in a minute. So in response to this criticism, I submit that Superman does not need to reflect today's worldviews or current trends because he is a timeless character. Superman has retained his appeal in the same way that James Bond has, because of his core characteristics. I mean, current social trends would label Bond's womanizing as misogynistic and abhorrent. But that part of the character has been a key element of his appeal. Similarly, Superman's core characteristic of decency is an appeal that has an appeal that endures, much like other noble characters, like pre-2017 Luke Skywalker. Um, if such decency was indeed completely anachronistic, then the simplistic heroism based on sacrifice and friendship of Lord of the Rings would no longer appeal to today's audience. The truth is that while society has changed, the essential nature of humans has not, which is why Shakespeare's studies of lust and greed and vengeance, hatred, compassion, and love still ring true as much today as they did 400 years ago. Superman speaks to something in us, something that admires nobility of spirit, something that wishes that right indeed made might. And as further evidence of the timeless quality of Superman, I submit that he's undergone many changes, both in his appearance, his powers. He's died and he's been resurrected, came back to life with a terrible hairstyle. And all that in the past 50 years. But these are all cosmetic changes because underneath, his core characteristics remain unchanged. And also, these changes have all been undone, some quicker than others, so that sooner or later, Superman is restored to the undies on the outside of his tights, flying up and away super strong character that we recognize. And the most recent change, which saw Clark Kent / Kal-El, so Superman, replaced by his son Jonathan, who has a different approach to saving the world. Well, that change has been undone too, with the cancellation of Superman, son of Kal-El, earlier this year. So as well as his decency, and despite his powers and otherworldly origin, Superman is a wonderful exploration of humanity. Now, if we look at another enduring, compelling hero, almost as enduring as Superman, his often ally and sometimes enemy, Batman. And we find that part of Batman's appeal comes from being a multifaceted character, made up of the obsessed but methodical vigilante, the playboy facade, and then the damaged but brilliant and determined Bruce Wayne. Now, I feel comfortable saying this as one of the key criticisms of the 2022's film The Batman was that without this multifaceted nature, Batman without Bruce Wayne, the character wasn't quite as interesting as previous iterations. Now, Superman has an even more multifaceted identity, and he's comprised of Clark Joseph Kent, son of Kansas farmers, raised with Midwestern rural Methodist values. Kal-El, the orphan son of Krypton, who's inherited a little knowledge of his alien culture. Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter, analogous to Batman's playboy Bruce public facade. And Superman, the hero, a public facade, but imbued with the values of the first aspect, Clark Joseph Kent. Now, skillful writers have known the best way to explore this complexity is via his relationships with other characters. Most often Lois Lane, but sometimes other heroes, Batman, Wonder Woman, and occasionally even the technologically preserved essence of his Kryptonian forebears. Through these relationships, we see Superman's qualities of decency and compassion revealed. We see him walk the tenuous line between man and demigod. When done properly, that makes for compelling stories, sometimes humorous ones, but often quite serious. And the tension between Superman's values as a human and the values of his Kryptonian culture have occasionally been a source of conflict, man versus himself. And they provided an opportunity for us to explore Superman as a man, what he believes, what he stands for, what is he willing to sacrifice. At the same time, he's trying to learn more about what it means to be Kryptonian, and that's more about himself. I would be remiss, and I'm trying to keep this sort of video essay quite brief, as there is a lot to say about Superman. The character has been around nearly 90 years. But I would be remiss not to mention the enormous influence of Christopher Reeve and the film series that he starred in. And part of the discussion which inspired this video spoke about how people had grown up with Reeve, and that would explain their love for the character, that performance. And there's no denying Christopher Reeve holds a special place in the pantheon of actors who have portrayed Superman. And the general consensus is that no one has done a better job. Some argue that no one ever will. Through intense physical preparation and total commitment to the role, Reeve captured not only Superman's core decency, but his humanity. His interactions with humans in a believable way was instantly charming. Reeve won over audiences instantly, and even people coming to see Superman the movie today, who heavily criticize the goofy tone and the dated special effects, and the Deus Ex Machina ending, which is one of the worst in cinema, they struggle to criticize Reeve's performance. And the scene that captures that is when, after Superman has spent the evening flying around with Lois Lane, he turns up in his guise as Clark Kent, and he's about to reveal himself to Lois. And he's portraying Clark, stooped, soft voice, shy, withdrawn, and he takes his glasses off and he says, "Lois, there's something I've got to tell you." He stands up straight. There's a physical transformation. And that level of performing skill and talent was something that Reeve brought to the role that perhaps no one ever will again. Anyway, such was a lasting influence of Reeve's portrayal that artists have drawn Superman resembling Reeve. The Secret Origins comic, Superman Brainiac, by Jeff Johns. And when John Byrne, the writer and artist who successfully rebooted Superman for DC Comics in 1986, drew a lot of inspiration from Superman's journey, from refugee orphan to farm boy to superhero. And he drew those influences from Superman the movie and from Reeve's performance. And Reeve's become synonymous with Superman to the point where any actor taking on the role is compared to the benchmark that he set. He's almost become bigger than the character of Superman himself. Now, this may be so, and it may be by virtue of Reeve's performance that an entire generation of people were turned on to Superman and have remained Superman fans. And I was enthralled by Reeve's work. And so much so that I enjoyed the objectively terrible Superman 4. I mean, that's cited as one of the worst films ever made, but I still enjoyed it because Reeve was brilliant in the lead. So I contend it's because Reeve embodied Superman's essential qualities so masterfully that he was so successful in the role. A success he was unable to emulate in the rest of his acting career, unfortunately. But those essential qualities were derived from the character, although it's widely reported they were shared by the actor himself. Rest in peace, Christopher Reeve. Right, so back to the primary criticism. The primary criticism for Superman is challenges. That he's so overpowered, there are no challenges for him, except for this contrivance of kryptonite. Now, if someone had only seen Superman the movie, this would be a reasonable criticism. But if you look just outside that single film, to the sequel 2 years later, you quickly find out that Superman can face legitimate challenges that place him in real danger and force him to question his own beliefs and actions. And these challenges can be broken down into several discrete categories, the first being physical challenges from powerful adversaries. Superman's comics are filled with encounters with beings who have physical powers that either match his own, like Shazam, General Zod, who appears in Superman 2, Bizarro, an alternate version of Superman, Mongol, Lobo, it's quite a long list, to beings that exceed his physical powers, like Darkseid, so the most evil antagonist in the DC universe. Now, Superman 2 and Men of Steel see Superman facing off against other Kryptonians. Same powers while they're on Earth. Superman 2 kind of more effectively conveys how difficult a situation this creates for Superman. Although in Man of Steel, in the Smallville battle, Superman is literally kicked around by two evil Kryptonians until he manages to fight them one-on-one and hold his own. Now, usually Superman manages to overcome such challenges by feats of quick thinking, like in Superman 2, because he can't overpower them. Sometimes it's quite a heavy cost to these victories, such as in the incredible, one of the best Justice League / Superman stories ever written, Kingdom Come. But as such, we cannot say that Superman is overpowered, even in the Christopher Reeve film series, because he inhabits a universe where threats exist that are more powerful than he. It should also be noticed that Superman's powers are not limitless. To be sure, they are immense, so he appears to ordinary people as godlike, but Superman is not God. He is not omniscient. He can't be in two places at once, which is a limitation even Lex Luthor can exploit in the first Superman film. And I have to admit at this point that the turning back time sequence in that film is, in my opinion, the worst Deus Ex Machina ending in the history of cinema. And it raises some terrible questions for Superman, like if he can turn back time to save Lois Lane, why not turn time back further and save his father, or Krypton, or anyone who's died? Why doesn't he undo every bad thing And if he can but doesn't, isn't he kind of morally reprehensible? I mean, even the 8-year-old me sitting in a darkened theater in 1978, loving every moment of that film, up until that point thought, wait a minute, this is really dumb. Now, if Mario Puzo had put a little bit more thought and care into that, giving a reason why Superman could only be capable of pulling off such a stunt once, that would have been easier to swallow. That Richard Donner thought it was a good way to end his cut of Superman 2 makes me question why people argue that's the superior version of the film. But that's a tangent for another time. But fortunately, turning back time is not an ability that Superman often manifests in the comics. Although he has been able to travel in time, not actually affect the flow of time itself. So the second sort of challenge that Superman faces from a physical level are from enemies who negate his power. There are enemies who can just take away the advantage he has. I mean, there's Kryptonite, of course, but his powers are limited against opponents with magic, psychic abilities, advanced technologies, Brainiac being the main example of that. And that was used to great effect in the Justice League and Superman animated series. There are enemies of Superman who can drain his powers, like the Parasite. And there are situations when Superman's powers are negated anyway. They operate at their best under a yellow sun environment such as we have on Earth. The wavelengths of a red sun, either neutralize or take away his powers. So there are many ways and situations which Superman can end up facing challenges without his powers to rely on. And then we come to the other kind of challenge, psychological, intellectual, and moral challenges. And some of the best Superman stories involve him having to contend with enemies who challenge his belief system. I mean, the storyline, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. They place him in a situation where he has to make difficult or impossible moral choices. The story For the Man Who Has Everything, or for going back to Kingdom Come. So stories by skillful writers have explored not just what Superman should do, but also what he shouldn't do. And I think the best example of that is Mark Millar's Red Sun, and to a lesser extent, Tom Taylor's Injustice. So now we're aware of what makes Superman appealing and how he can be challenged. So we can see that a really skillful writer, or even a skillful writer, could craft a compelling Superman story. And in my unlearned, because I am not a trained writer, I am not a writer by trade, but in my humble opinion, it really just takes 3 elements. And the first is challenge. Whether it's an adversary who can match him physically, or exploit his limitations, or place him in an intellectual and moral quandary that he can't simply punch his way out of or lift his way out of. Second, explore some of his humanity, including the supporting characters, have them interact with them, either as Clark Kent or Superman or both, but in situations that require him to act like a human being. And that's something Superman comics writers have done brilliantly, something Reeve did brilliantly. And third, have either the challenge or the interactions or both cause him to question his decisions, whether they are practically correct or morally correct, or both, or neither. Some of the best Superman stories end with him reflecting on what's occurred, on what he's done or not done, and the consequences. So if a writer can capture those 3 elements in a Superman story in a way that feels organic rather than contrived, well, chances are it'll be good. So to conclude, I would say that with a little more knowledge and contemplation about Superman, it becomes easier to see why many people find him compelling and have done so for nearly 90 years. The suggestion that he's boring or outdated, it can be quite easily countered by the assertion that he speaks to an essential element of our humanity, the desire for a fusion of morality and power. And that's a concept that is timeless. Similarly, the argument that he's overpowered does not hold up to scrutiny because he inhabits a universe where plenty of beings can challenge him, not just by dint of their power or ability to neutralize his powers, but to challenge his very beliefs and values. Finally, the exploration of the facets of his nature, the interplay between the otherworldly and the mundane, make him a complex and interesting character. So that's all I've written. I'd be interested to hear what people think. Before I do, I'd just like to plug the stream that I heard these criticisms leveled on was the Mr. Brown Alliance Midweek Musings, which is a good fun stream, sort of a transatlantic stream. It's quite dry, a bit of British humour mixed with American humour. that deals with sort of pop culture topics. It's a bit not safe for work sometimes, but it's good fun and worth a listen to. So if you're interested, check out Mr. Brown Alliance. Listen to a stream, maybe throw him a like, share, and subscribe. Anyway, thank you for listening. It's been 20 minutes. That's far too long. All the best, and up, and away.